When the legislature is deciding how to spend their money, they have all of the projects compete against each other. They go through, you have so much money to spend. People come and say this project is important. Someone else comes and says this project is important. When you earmark a project, you say we're going to take some of this money that would otherwise be available to everyone. We're just going to take it out of that equation. It goes to this project no matter how important something else is. It's a real problem when you start earmarking dollars, because you may have a more important project that needs funding and not enough money because you've earmarked money for a less important project. That's why the Taxpayers Association opposes ZAP taxes or RAP taxes, these various boutique taxes that take money that might otherwise be available to everything and say, you know what, we're only going to be able to spend that on the zoo or on arts or on parks. And those aren't probably as important as police or fire, for example. As a rule, the legislature has been very good in opposing earmarks. We have some earmarks here in Utah, but really very few. We do a very good job of taking the vast majority of the general fund dollars and saying those are going to be spent. Everybody has to compete for those dollars. Doesn't really matter how important the project is. We're not going to earmark money for that. There are at least two instances where the Taxpayers Association has supported earmarking dollars. First, and probably the most obvious earmark out there, is income tax. All income tax dollars in Utah must be spent on either public or higher education. They can't be spent for Medicaid. They can't be spent for criminal justice or for the highway patrol. All income tax dollars must be spent on public or higher education. The second one, and this was a rather novel thing that happened in the last legislative session, Senate Bill 229 said, let's, as a means of planning our transportation infrastructure, let's earmark a portion of the growth in sales tax revenues. And the Taxpayers Association supported that. There was quite a tussle between the House and Senate and the governor's office. The governor actually vetoed it, and House and Senate came together and said, you know what, we're going to override this veto. And so we have that on the books. HB 136 wants to earmark 10% of the growth in sales tax revenue to replace diminishing federal dollars. Everybody knows that the federal government at some point is going to be running out of money that they can send back to Utah, and we need to figure out a way to replace that. HB 174 says let's set aside 15% of the growth in sales tax revenues for the Water Resources Construction Fund. Finally, SB 54 wants to earmark 30% of the growth in sales tax revenue for public education. Individually, those projects may be great, but collectively, you're looking at over half of the revenue or the increase in sales tax that is already going to be, that will already be earmarked. That's a problem. Well, normally what you want to do is let all of the projects compete on their merits. But when you take money off the table with an earmark and say, this project is so important that no one else gets it, it's entirely possible that you may find that maybe public education or Medicaid or some other project comes up that's more important than what you've already earmarked this money for. But it's earmarked. You can't change that. And you just don't have the flexibility that you need to make sure that only the most important projects get funded. Our hope is that the legislature stays the course that made them the best managed state in the nation and says, we've rejected earmarks before, we should continue down that path and not adopt any more earmarks.